My name is Jim Heavey. I'm from Wood Magazine, and our series this year is on routers. We kind of packed a lot into the day. We're going to start out by talking about routers in general, all the different types of routers that are available, some of the things to look for when shopping for a router. We'll also talk about bits, and I have some ideas on bit selection that may surprise some of you. We'll talk a little bit about how to use a router, some of the problems that you have with routing, with chipping and burning and that kind of things, and we'll deal with those. And then lastly, a little bit about maintenance. Our second thing today at 2 o'clock goes from routers to router jigs. I've got a bunch of them on the table over there. I work for Wood Magazine, and we have about 500,000 subscribers, and probably half of those have an idea about a jig we should make. So our thought is that most people prefer to make the jigs before even having a project to use them on, but I have a few over here that I think that you'll like and you'll find that come in fairly handy. And our third presentation of the day, we'll take the knowledge of the routers and some of the jigs and talk about a couple of projects. One, here's an issue for scrap. This is a project made nothing out of scrap. So that we kind of set everybody straight here. Most of you have scrap that's older than your kids. I'll show you how to use some of that stuff that may be sitting around the shop. And also a little bit about making a mantle and fireplace surround. Not as much making it as talking about the different bits that it takes to kind of do that thing and some of the layout issues. And you get a pretty good feel for all of that that's happening. We are sponsored this year by the Bosch people, Gorilla Glue, and the Bench Dog people that make the bench cookies and things. We're thrilled that they're our sponsors. They kind of help make the world go around. But if you've ever heard me talk before, I don't work for them. I work for the magazine. So this is not an infomercial. There's nothing I'm not selling anything. In fact, to be honest, I even hate to recommend things because I don't want you to think that the magazine is out endorsing some of this stuff. This is pretty much a generic, non-proprietary presentation, and I say that so that at the end of my presentations, there's no reason to look at the floor or avoid eye contact with me because you don't have to buy anything. The goal is just to see it, and if somebody said to you, here, what do you think of this, and you take it, if you've been around the shows for a while, you'll never do that when you talk to a vendor, because you'll notice that everybody on both sides of you has their arms folded because they're not touching that thing, and you have to figure out a way to give it back and say that what's really not, I don't know if I want. So the point is, I'm called a dyslexic learner. I don't always get it when I read something. I have to touch and feel something when I do it. It just seems to make that synaptic thing work for me. All of the stuff that you see here, the props and everything, are for you to play with. So between presentations, if you want to play with something, hold something, I have a live cord in the back. If you want to plug a machine in, it's just fine with me because I think that's sometimes how we make that connection. You're going to put a bit in there. Please let me know that first. But the point is I'd like you to kind of play with anything. Last thing is, if you've got questions or if I confuse or irritate you while I'm doing this, please just yell. I don't mind this being interactive at all. It kind of helps that information go back and forth. And I did say last thing, but I swear. One last thing. There's a cabinet on the side over here. It's a router bit cabinet. It appeared in the magazine quite a while back. I made one of those and I'm donating that to the show, this one. If you signed up for anything when you came in the show, woodworking related, you're in our contest. In Houston at the last show that we're going to do in April, we'll pick a name out of that and I'll send you that cabinet. It's just kind of a thanks for coming to the show. If you are interested in making one of those, just in front of the cabinet is a sheet of paper with a website on it. Just go to woodmagazine.com/bitcabinet. We'll send you the free plans, kind of again as a thank you to coming here. It's a cool cabinet. In the front of that you'll see some plexiglass on it. Normally that would have a solid wood door. This is the woodworker's aquarium. If you've got a lot of bits, might as well show everybody that you have them, and this is the way to do it. And yet in a minute I'm going to tell you only need 6 profiles, so I don't know which side of my mouth I'm talking out of, but the point is it's a cool cabinet, it's a good project, and if you're lucky you win it. Okay. Routers come in 3 different styles in general. The first one is the small one. These are for the older people that are here. This used to be called a laminate trimmer. In days of old, the countertops were all made out of laminate. They used the smaller routers to scribe in countertops and cabinets to the wall. The new ones now are really smaller routers. It's just a smaller version, but it's a complete system. It's easily adjustable. It's got variable speed. It's all the things that you would expect in a normal router, just in a slightly smaller package. That's the first of the type we'll talk about. To kind of put it in perspective, my first router was a little Rockwell router, steel base, aluminum type top, toggle switch actually on the top of this thing. It was that old. If you used one of those now, OSHA would tell you that you'll probably die because you electrocute yourself or do something that's it. So all the old woodworkers are probably dead. So the point is that old one was a 1/2 horsepower router. And when Sears or Craftsman, whoever it was that came out with the first 1 horsepower router, everybody's thinking, wow, what would you do with all that power? Well, this is a 1 horsepower router, so I don't want people to think it's really diminutive size is an indication that it's really not going to do anything. Be surprised the number of people are using those for dovetails, roundovers, rabbiting, those kind of things because of its small size. It actually works out really well. So anyway, that's the first type. Second type that most people are more familiar with is the 2 1/4, 2 horsepower type machines. In days of old, you got a fixed base and a plunge base. And they really don't do that as much anymore. I guess you can find them if you look, but most of them now are coming out with what they call a combination kit. They have a single motor. They give you a fixed base that goes on the router table and stays there, and the plunge base for you to use for your regular hand routing. And I guess if I had my druthers, my machine for all my hand routing, anything I did outside the table, would be a plunge base. You know, it's giving you complete ability to plunge something, but then when you lock that, and we'll show you plunging in the second presentation day, when you lock it down, it now becomes a fixed base. You're kind of getting a 2-for-1 thing. And because you can't use 2 routers at one time anyway, having a fixed base in your table works well, and switching that motor between the 2 seems to work really well for everybody. For those that have a concern that this is not a real big router, it's not the big 3 1/4 horse, and would I really want that on my router table when I'm doing raised panel and rail install and that kind of stuff? I've had a 2 1/4 horsepower router in my table forever. Ever since I graduated from the 1 horsepower router, from that Craftsman router a million years ago. And the fact is, I do an awful lot of routing and raised panel and rail install and all these things. 2 1/4 is fine. And for the average person, it's more than enough. But if you're doing cabinet work and you're doing it in Maple, and you're running your router table 8 hours a day and a lot of work, then maybe the big 3 1/4 horsepower routers are for you. It's a bigger machine. It really belongs on a table. Anybody that's trying to use that as a hand-operated router will find out real quickly the tops of your arms are screaming because it's so heavy. It's very top-heavy, which means trying to use this is like balancing a bowling ball on a stick. It's just really tough to kind of keep it in control, and it's expensive. It's usually a lot more expensive than you'll find for some of these, even these combination kits. But in a table for heavy-duty, long-term, more commercial-type use, this is your machine. I'm not here to talk you in or out of any of these particular things, but I think picking what you think that you're going to be using is more appropriate than just saying bigger is better. Tim the Toolman Taylor was on a long time ago. This is 3 1/4 horse. I think somebody now is working on a 4 horse, and if they had a 5 horsepower motor that you need a battery to get the thing running so it wouldn't pop a fuse, we'd probably buy it. But whether or not it's worth it or not is something else again, and for most of you, I think these smaller 2 1/4 horsepower routers would be fine. When you're looking for routers, one of the most, to me, the most important things is make sure that you're not buying a fixed speed router, meaning that it's got a single speed, usually at 25,000 RPM. The problem I have with those is that the fixed speed, especially in this part of the country, has another option in addition to not being able to slow the router down, and I'll explain. The first part of this in a variable speed, and that's what I'm suggesting, costs $10 or $15 more for that, allows you to run a bit like this at 1/4 inch at 25,000 RPM. At the same time, put a bit like this in your router and turn it down to what's recommended at 10 to 12,000 RPM, and you have a way to do it. The issue is, and I'm making up these figures, but you'll kind of get the gist. If I run this bit at 25,000 RPM and I kind of clock the speed of the outside edge of that cutter as it goes around 25,000 times a minute, maybe going 5 miles an hour. But if I take that same 25,000 RPM and I put this bit in it, and I look at what the outside edge of this cutter is doing, going around 25,000 times a minute, maybe going 50 miles an hour. That loss of control, the chipping, burning, and all the things that come with it, in spite of the fact that the manufacturer says, please don't do that, it is just, to me, an issue. For $10 or $15 more on a router, you're getting variable speed, and what you're getting out of that is the ability to kind of control that speed. And the other issue is, back to my old Rockwell router, they were very mechanical in the old days, and all you did was use a light dimmer. You turned down the voltage of the tool ran a little bit slower, and everybody's happy. All the new tools now are computer or digitally controlled. If you reduce the power to that, you'll smoke the motor. So what you have to do now is buy an off-market speed control. The digital ones, $25, $40, $50 for those, and you don't even have it on the machine. So to me, I think it's a false savings to buy the single speed ones next to variable speed. And the second part is, what you're going to find is that variable speed also gives you something else in a router, and it's called soft start. I don't know if you've ever used one that has soft start. Right now, if you start a router up, it goes from 0 to 25,000 RPM in a heartbeat. You live in the same part of the country, give or take, that I do, latitude-wise. I'm outside Chicago. It's going to be cold this winter. You're going to find that if you've got a shop floor that's concrete, it holds all that heat. You try and heat that thing up when you're ready to go to your shop, and you turn on a machine that goes from sleeping to marathon running in a heartbeat. You'll find the battery, the bearings and the arbors don't last as long. They're trying to use very tight, heavy, thick oils and lubes and stuff that don't work well. And the other thing is, I've got that live plug I'll show you, that when you go to start up a router like that, most of you know that have used one of those, they have a pronounced jerk to them. So you have to start it off the work or keep it away from your work so it's not pulling into it. Just to make sure that this is set, there we go. Do this at 25,000 RPM instead of just at 20, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. I wouldn't do this with any other thing that doesn't have soft start to it, but just with one finger and turning this on allows it to ramp up to 25,000 RPM with that pronounced jerk. Bearings last longer, routers last longer, depending on the cold and all that stuff. I just think you're better off with that. The last thing that most of these have with them too, that come with variable speed, they also have the ability of that machine to sense changes in density in the wood and increase the torque of that machine to keep the speed the same. So you're routing a piece of pine and the softwood, the early growth on a piece of pine, and you come up close to a knot. The machine will sense that there's a definite change in density. It'll increase that torque to keep the speed the same. It eliminates an awful lot of burning, of chipping, and those kind of things, and it comes as all part of these packages with variable speed for that 10 or 15 bucks. I just think that in most cases you're better off with that. Again, these are personal things, but I just think that that's important. Those are the three different sizes. Generally, nobody makes something much different than that. So the small handheld type routers, the plunge fixed base combination kits, and then these behemoths that normally go in on a router table. A couple things also when you're looking. The better routers will come with two collets, one for 1/2 inch and one for 1/4 inch. I like the idea. Most of the better routers come with these. You will find routers that only come with a 1/2 inch collet and then a 1/4 inch sleeve or adapter that allows you to use the thinner shank type bits in them. Generally speaking, in a perfect world, there's no problem there. But the fact is, you're using a 1/2 inch collet. You're doing a lot of routing in pine and fir and cherry, and you're getting sawdust and a little bit of pitch and gum that builds up in there. And then you're trying to take a 1/4 inch sleeve and slide it inside and make sure that it fits well enough that when this thing is running at 25,000 RPM, that bit is running dead straight. It's machined to do that with two separate collets, but when you're adding another one that may not fit quite as well, you may have what's called a little run out in that bit. Real tough in the bearings, the cut line is not as clean. I just think that looking for routers that have two separate collets, one for each, is just a better bet. You'll see that as you're looking for them, and something to look for. And I guess the last thing is, and I know I'm old school, on the front of this bigger router and the smaller one, you'll see a red button for those that can see it. It's an arbor lock. It allows you to push in that little collet and lock that arbor down so that you can use just a single wrench to put bits in and out of there. I'm not a big fan of that. I find that people slip off of those nuts when they're trying to tighten them, but it really allows you to put way more tension on that nut than I think it deserves. The collet nuts are designed really well. The collet. Sliding a bit in there just takes a little bit of pressure to hold that in there and a little bit to get it out of there, and over tightening it causes that collet to collapse. And there's no fix for that once you've deformed it. Most of you have had that issue. You try and push a bit in and it's real tough, or you get done routing and you can't get it out of there. It's usually because you put too much tension on here and you wound up deforming that collet. So here's the thought. In days of old, and still some manufacturers do, they ship 2 wrenches to you. Use these instead of that arbor lock. Because if you put them opposite each other like this and squeeze to tighten that collet nut, you're going to find out that you've got the perfect pressure to hold that bit in there. Your squeeze pressure is plenty. And by reversing them the other way and pushing them this way, it will unlock that bit. No more knuckle busting that they call it. No more tightening like this to try and get that thing down there. The 2 wrenches is much better. I know there's one more thing to lose, but the point is that it's an easier way to understand how much tension to put on and take off. This is not fair to say this, but all of these routers, or any of these routers, should last you your lifetime. And I say it's not fair because for some of you, it'll easily last your lifetime. If you're younger people, maybe a little bit longer. But the point is, if you treat them all and you've got something to handle them all of the bits and everything that you use in them are going to work better for you long term. Okay? One last thing before I forget it. Our magazine does, which a lot of other ones do too, we rate different tools. When you start looking for machines, routers, table saws, joiners, whatever you're looking for, my personal feeling is that you look at not necessarily the top tool in those categories and think that that's the top tool, that's what I've got to buy. There's a natural bias built into all tool testing, and I'll explain. I don't want to make this sound negative. I tested tools for a while for the magazine, and about 7 years or so, the editor and I decided that I shouldn't do that anymore because we have a booth sponsor. I work for Wood Magazine, but we have a booth sponsor this year, most years. And the concern is that if I tested one of those tools, that people would say, if they got a good review, that, oh sure, well that's Heavey's test thing anyway, that's why they're getting it. I would never allow that. I don't think the magazine, I know the magazine wouldn't because our credibility ruined, but we don't want you to think that, so we give that to private woodworkers. We send you the criteria, we send you the tools, here do this, and then we print what it is you do, so we get a little bit more unbiased. The point is, I'm left-handed. When I did tool testing, I naturally look at something from a left-handed point of view. There's only 10% of us in our right minds, which is where I am. But the point is, 90% of those people are picking up that tool, holding that tool, different line of sight, different dominant eye, and they're wondering, what were they thinking when they tested this tool? The button's on the wrong side, or it's hard to get to. I didn't intend that, but just the way I'm using it makes that natural bias. That's what I'm talking about. So, long story short, look at those tool tests. The top 2 or 3 tools in any test are generally really good quality tools. What separates them are idiosyncrasies that are more or less important to you. I've lost some hearing, a lot of hearing over the years. If 2 tools rate exactly the same, but one has a 10 decibel decrease in the sound that's coming out of it, that's the tool I'm buying. But the kid that may have tested this, a 25-year-old kid that's still being told that that could ruin you, that sound could ruin you, that's paying no attention, well, they didn't hear that. They didn't do that in their test, and maybe that's what it rated number 1 at. I'll give you an example. I tell people I don't work for the companies that do our support here, but I encourage questions, but this guy stands up and he said, I have a concern about your router. I said, okay, I'll refute you to the corporate people. And I said, what is it? He said, well, it's that little palm router. And when he stood up, God, he was huge, and real long arms and everything. And he said, if I hold that router, I'm afraid that my finger is going to slide in that opening because this is a relatively small housing. And I was going to tell him that you need to talk to the corporate people, or, you know, that's why you look at different tools. And somebody in the audience stood up right away and he said, I hate to say this, but that's a self-limiting problem. You stick your finger in that hole, it cuts it off to a point where it won't fit in that hole anymore. And so the point is, if you had looked at that tool and you think, well, I'm going to buy that because it's the number 1 tool, and you have huge hands, you may be not as comfortable with this. Or if you're a woman and you've got smaller hands, this may be your perfect thing, but rated less or higher. So the point is, in shows like this, in the stores and things, boy, I'm very tactile, and I think a lot of woodworkers are too. Try the tool, play with it, hold it so that what you're feeling and the little idiosyncrasies are what you're made for. Still find them in this top tier of tools, but look at something with a little bit more of an inclusion towards you. Most of your tools, most of you know this, you buy a tool, it's kind of like buying a car. You take it out of the store, and if you try and resell that thing, if you get more than 25 cents on the dollar, you're doing really well. So this is your tool. Buy what it is you want, having made the agreement that in your mind that you're trying to find the best tool, but one made for you. So rather than pontificate anymore, that's my feeling. Okay, although I won't stop pontificating, but I'm going to stop on the routers for the second. Second thing is router bits. Probably one of the biggest issues that ever comes up when we do presentations on routers, because there's no standardization. There's nothing out there that says that this is the best bit, that's not as good a bit. A magazine, not ours, a few years ago tried to do an objective test, which you can't. They did a CNC machine on MDF type material, figuring that the CNC machine could be dialed. The MDF material was the same consistency, and every manufacturer complained because they said nobody's going to run these at 25,000 RPM like that. Nobody's going to run them through material like that that's so abrasive. So the issue was never there. Here's my concern, my problem, whatever. I'm not a real big set of bits fan. I believe when people come in, they'll walk in a show like this or look in a catalog and they see a set of 30 bits for $100. And it's got all the profiles, and they're all excited about it. And when you think about it, if you divide that $100 into the 30 tools, you'll notice it's paying a little bit over $3 a piece for a router bit. You're looking at a tool that they're all made the same out of a solid block of steel, but the quality of the steel varies. The type of carbide, and whether or not it's virgin carbide or second or third or fourth or fifth cut carbide, the degree of sharpening, the type of bearing that's on, the degree of welding or brazing, and all those things add money to those bits. And if you're buying a $3 bit, the person that's selling it to you has got to be making $1.50, and the person that sold it to him, since a lot of these people don't make their own bits, has got to be making 75 cents. That's tough to demand an awful lot of quality out of a 75-cent bit when you don't want chipping, burning, dulling, and those kind of things, and to me that's an issue. No slight to carpenters at all, but you'd have no problem using a 20-tooth table saw blade. If you could find one that's high-speed steel, you'd be just as happy, because then you could save some money. But the point is, if you chip a little bit of plywood or chip an edge on a 2x8 that you're ripping down the middle, who cares? But you're doing plywood now, and if anybody's bought it in the last 10 years or so, technology of making plywood has gotten to a point where the veneers are so thin that 150 grit sandpaper brushed past the surface cuts that stuff off. You would use a 80-tooth blade with this, and this on it, real high cut, because you don't want any chipping or burning. And yet sometimes we go back to these less expensive bits, and we're complaining a little bit about the fact that it just doesn't cut clean, or it burned, and I'm sanding. So here's my thought. All router bits, generally speaking, are one of 4 profiles or a combination of them. They're either straight, they're angled. If this were a square edge, they are coved, which means like a scallop cut out of the end, or if they're square edge, they're round over. All bits are like that. If you take your 25 or 30 bits in a big set, and in a year, you're doing a lot of routing, put a pencil mark next to each one of those bits every time you use it. My feeling is you'd probably use 5 of those bits, they'll be black. Some of them you haven't taken the plastic off yet, okay? And those 5 bits will all be one of those 4 profiles or a combination of it. So here's my idea. This is 6 bits here. They encompass all of those 4 profiles or combinations of those profiles. By buying good ones, it'll be in the $15 range, maybe 20 bucks or something like that. You're paying about the same for those as you're in effect paying for the 5 or 6 that you're using out of these big sets. These have virgin carbide. When they cut something, there's snowflakes falling instead of sawdust coming out. They'll last, again, almost forever, or your lifetime. They're sharpenable if that ever happens, because the carbide is such a high grade. And in places like this too, spring comes in, your concrete in your shop and your garage is nice and cold. That nice, fresh but moist air comes in there. The garage floor sweats, your shop floor sweats, and people complain that, God, my router bits have all of this kind of oxidation on them. Yep, they're probably a lesser quality steel on there. That's what it takes. So the better bits, I think, last longer. I know last longer, cut better, burn less, all those kind of things than the other ones are, and you're getting the equivalent. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I just think that you're better off with this. Okay, and if you bought one of those big sets, and you wore out 1 or 2 of those bits, which you will, rather than getting a free update on it, buy a better bit that is that same profile, because evidently that's the one you're using. You'll be surprised the difference between quality bits when you use them, especially after the first 20 feet or so, at how well they cut forever. I have some that you know, even after 5 years or so, you can start doing this and you'll actually get fingernail cuttings out of this while you're doing it. That's a sharp bit. And the other ones don't stay sharp quite as long, okay? All right, these are the 6 bits. I just want to kind of go over them. You'll kind of get the idea. I know that there are other ones out there, but I think this will do what you're going to do. The first is a 1/4 inch. This is straight bit, okay? Oh, and by the way, 1/2 inch shanks wherever you can. 1/4 inch shanks have a tendency, under a little bit of pressure from the side, to deflect a little bit as they're running at 25,000 RPM. Not a terrible thing, but it's there. So anytime that you get a 1/2 inch shank one, they seem to be a more stable bit, and they add about $1 to the cost, maybe $1.50, so it's not a big deal. Straight bit. On a router with a straight edge, they groove, they dado, they rabbet. I'll show you in our next presentation how they mortise, much easier than trying to do it on a drill press, faster. And the jig that I've got is a super expensive jig. that will allow you to do that in a heartbeat. There's nothing too mortising. It's done with a straight bit. Second bit is a straight bit. You're going to hear a lot about this bit during the day today. This one's called a pattern bit or a flush trim bit. Okay? The bearing that's on here, the diameter of that bearing sticks out the same as the cutters on the edge of this. So the key with this is, when I first started doing the shows 10 or 11 years ago, whenever it was, we did a project where we were showing people how to make a table, a shaker table. It had little feet like this. It had kind of a delicate little leg to it, a transition piece, the stretcher, and then the circular or square top. I made one a weekend. It's easy to do because what was nice about it is we used a template, which I'll talk about in the next one. But by double stick taping this template on there and rough cutting with a bandsaw or scroll saw or whatever, in 10 minutes I was ready by using this pattern bit that rides on the template itself and removes everything that sticks off the end of that to provide a finished project. And we gave these away. Every weekend we gave the table away. Because I don't know what I was going to do with it. Somebody said, give it to your friends, and after the fourth show, I'm giving it away. So the point is, it was easy. And here's the other thing. Anybody here that's ever cut something with an ellipse on it, inside or outside radius, has tried to sand these smooth with either a spindle sander or something, and you're pretty frustrated because it doesn't seem to work. A lot of you bought spindle sanders because Norm Abrams had one. You watched him cut something, and of course they've got this thing going up and down, and he runs it on this piece, and they never show it afterwards, because I'm convinced that, much like us, as soon as that shoot was done, he goes to his table, clamps it in a vise, and uses hand sander to try and take the little edges that were left after the spindle sander, that $350 you spent. But the point is, in here, by creating a template, and again we'll talk more about this, if this edge is smooth, the pattern bit doesn't care what the wood is, it follows this pattern and trims everything else to match. Some of you, if you're using a spindle sander, just as a real quick explanation, the spindle sanders caused little ripples on the bottom, and it wasn't always your fault. When wood grows, it grows very quickly in the spring. It's called early growth. It's soft, okay? During the summertime, it takes longer. It's drier, it's warmer. The wood grows a little bit slower. It's called late growth, and it's hard. When you run a spindle sander like this, especially against the end grain or on the face, it has a tendency to take off more of the softer wood than it does the harder wood. That's what you're feeling on the underside edge. But with this template on there and with a pattern bit following it or flush trim bit, it doesn't care. These edges will be just as smooth all the time. Okay. One of the other things here, let's just say you don't have a straight edge or a joiner, and you're looking for a straight edge in this wild board. All you need, I don't have one here, is a clamp, a square. Clamp it to that edge and allow that exposed edge to be out there, and use this pattern bit. It runs past the square edge, and as square as the edge is, as square as this piece is. So in one case, this is a $350 spindle sander. In another case, it's a $700 joiner. Okay? Before I get carried away here and in trouble, mainly marital issues, I'm not for 1 minute explaining that you don't need that spindle sander or that joiner. I think you need two of every tool in case one goes bad. You've got another one to come right in the way. Because I've had people say, oh, thanks. The wife is saying that you don't need that because you're holding that little thing that he was holding in his hand. No, I think this works. But the point is, this works very well, and it does repetitive jobs beautifully. If you've put a piece of wood banding on plywood to hide the bands that are on the front, this bit running on the plywood trims everything off on the band. It's perfect. No need for special setups or anything. I told you I get tired of hearing about this bit, but that's a, whatever, $15 bit or something, and it's called a flush trim bit. While I got it, all bits get their name by how they hang from a handheld router. Okay? This hangs this way. This is called a top bearing pattern bit. They are displayed in the stores this way because I guess aesthetically they look a little bit better. Please don't order a bottom bearing if that's what you want, because this is what you'll get, because this is how it hangs in a router. Okay? I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. Okay, third one. This is called a chamfer bit. What it does is it creates a recess on the back of a picture frame, molding, whatever it is, to put your glass and your mat and all that kind of stuff. And I'm willing to admit, and most people should do this, your dados in the backs of these things are almost always done on a table saw with a dado blade. It's faster and quicker, it doesn't leave any chip marks, there's nothing to it. And when you miter it, you get a beautiful look and an enclosed rabbet on the back of this. The problem is when you're doing what's called rail and stile work, Rails always go this way, styles go this way. When you're putting pieces together that in effect are butt jointed, and you do them on a table saw, you cut the rabbets in for the frames, after you glue this together, you will be left with a rectangular hole here, 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 and here. Because by butt joining them, it doesn't hide the spot that you went through when you did that. The miter does, but this doesn't. So if I take one of these things and I join it any way that I want, and I come back at it later with a rabbeting bit, this automatically cuts that recess in the back, that whether it's mitered or whatever it is, that is going to look really nice and not have any of those exposed holes. Okay, so that's your third bit. Fourth one is called a chamfer. This is where we deviate from here out onto the side. They come in 45 degree and 22.5. I'm a little bit more, I like the 45 a little bit more. I don't have a piece of plywood here, but if I cut a beautiful piece of two-sided veneer on a real expensive table saw blade, I will get a knife-like edge. And having done that, would anybody here take their hand and rub this against them on the edge without pulling up 1,000 slivers or peeling off half of that veneer on the edge? And when I talk finishing, finishes won't stick to that sharp edge. Finishes are liquid. They have a tendency, because of their surface tension, to kind of pull back on each other, and what you're going to have is an exposed edge with very little material on here. Okay? If you take that chamfer bit, put it a nothing out of your router or your router table, and run that around the edge of this, you leave an almost imperceptible little knock on the side. That's called breaking that edge. None of those slivers are a problem anymore, and finish sticks to it like glue. It's got something to hold on to. I know that most of you can't see it from where you are, but these are called inset drawers on the back of this cabinet. The ones that you make are normally always overlaid. They have a 1/4 inch or 3/8 lip around the outside. You do that so in case the opening is not square, or the drawer is not square, or nobody can tell. But on an inset, everything better be square, because you can see the case, you can see the drawer, and you look for any openings in that reveal line between them to tell whether or not you did a good job or not. And seasonal changes in humidity, which makes that drawer face shrink or expand, because no finish will stop the expansion and contraction of material, gets worse or better depending on the season and your perspective. If you take, like we did here, take a chamfer bit and either run it around the inside edge of the drawer opening or around the inside face of that drawer, you create an architectural detail that's like a shadow line. Makes it very hard to visualize that opening anymore, and provides a really nice way to make things look nice and hide that potential for expansion and contraction or something a little bit out of line. Okay? Last two bits are brothers and sisters. This is called a cove bit, and this is a roundover bit. If I have a square edge, a cove leaves like a scallop on it, and a round edge will just put a radius on that edge. Those are the 6 bits. That's really all you need there. Every little profile is in there, and the way I'll explain it is, this is one of the most popular profiles of all router bits. It's called an OG. Okay, OG is the Greek word for S. If you do crossword puzzles a lot, it's the 4-letter Greek word for S, if that helps. Or if they say OG, it's ESS. There's no charge for this. Just, I like to throw that part in. The point is, one of the most popular of all bits has a cove on the bottom and a roundover on the top. So what you're getting at, if you have this bit, you don't need the last 2 I showed you. And if you have those 2 that I showed you, you don't need the OG bit. Because if you take this board and you run one side over with a roundover and the other side with a cove, you have the OG. It's there. So my point is, having these profiles and learning how those profiles work provides pretty much everything that you need to get started or even continue in woodworking, but you bought good ones, and you're buying ones again that create shavings that come off instead of sawdust. You're getting something that should last most of you a long, long time, and you're getting a quality thing, much like you would a big table saw blade. Okay? Real quickly too, these, the cove and the roundover that I showed you are 1/4 inch radius, so they have different ones of those. If a project calls for a 3/16 inch cove, use the 1/4 and shut up about it. Okay? Instead of telling everybody, well, a project called for 3/16, all I have was a 1/4, it's a little bit bigger, but I don't think anybody can tell right now. Yes, they can, because you just showed them. Okay? My feeling is that they're woodworkers and they're craftsmen. Both of them make mistakes. We all do. Everybody does. Craftsmen, though, will fix those mistakes and not tell you that they made them and not point out where they were before they fixed them. Woodworkers tell you all those things. So these bits work, okay? And when you buy a bit, let's just say you've got a project coming up and you need a special bit for it, then buy it, but learn what that profile does so that all that bit does, so you learn what all those little profiles do, so you don't have to go out and buy more. And I want to give you one example. I got asked, I just made this at home this last week I was home. I got a lot of questions about it. This is the most popular bits. This is an OG with a fillet, they call it, a little shoulder on it. By taking that one bit, putting it in your router table, and I had it full face to start with. This is the OG with the fillet. Lowering it a little bit gave me just the OG. A little bit more gave me just the cove. Using just part of the top part, I got the round over, then a round over with what they call a fillet, or that shoulder, and then a round over on both sides gives you a bead. So one bit, 6 profiles. And then add a little excitement, put it on my router table, left this board, a small little carrier board about 3.5 inches away from the router, and instead of this board going at the bit flat like this, I tilted it up at 15 degrees. This is that same full profile that we have at this end, and you'll be, if you come up here and play with it or take it, you'll see how much different that profile looks. Same bit, this is a 7th one. And all bits are the same. This way provides different looks than this way does. So by learning what those are and using a really good set of bits, you don't need all these additional profiles. You're going to anyway. You want to fill that box. But I'm just trying to convince you that get good ones when you do it and learn them. You'll be using relatively few bits, but what you're getting out of all the profiles that work well for you. Okay? One more thing with router bits. There's a thing called shear angle. Shear angle is the angle of the cutter on here in relation to the shank. In this straight bit, there is none. It's just straight. It does a great job. It will cut edges like this and faces like this and groove and dado and all that kind of stuff. No problem at all. Occasionally, though, when it does end grain, these are really sharp. They're running at 25,000 RPM. They're probably fine. But the thought is that it's all but the same as putting this piece straight up on your joiner table. You're going to get the potential for chip out, because it's trying to go on end grain and cut it. Now there's ways to stop that, but the point is that that's a potential. If though I were to take that shear angle and change it to make it a slight angle in here, I would be shaving that material off. If anybody here has bought a joiner in a little while, you're going to notice now that some of the joiners, the arbor on those, are coming with blades that are at an angle or shearing. They're not straight across anymore. And they're telling you that you can send a figured piece of maple through there and not chip out. That's why. So I believe that in life, and woodworking is all the same, there is a yin-yang factor. It's what you pay for something versus what your perceived need is going to be or your use out of it. This bit is very inexpensive. It's straight shank. But by changing that to a very slight angle, which may cost $1, $2, $3 more, it has a tendency to shave wood. So what you're getting out of that is all but no chipping. No fear about using it any place without those problems. And to me, a lot of times, that's really worth it. And again, that's a decision that you have to make. I'll show you on this one. This is that rabbiting bit. I know you can't see it from there, but please come up and play. Instead of that blade being like this, it's angled slightly this way. Anybody here that's ever used a rabbit bit on the inside of something knows that occasionally when you're using it, you're hearing this chip, 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 chip. As you're doing it, it's pulling pieces out of there because it's a straight angle. A slight shear angle on this has a tendency to shave that off as opposed to do that straight cut. You'll find that there's all but no chip out. It's going to cost a couple dollars more than the straight one, but again, those are those decisions you make. Shear angle on steroids is spiral up and spiral down. When we do the mortising thing a little later, I'm going to show you how a straight bit like this will do it. But what it does, a straight bit does, is as it cuts its groove, it sends all that sawdust directly behind the bit. Sawdust takes up more room than solid wood, so it packs that opening solid. And what sometimes happens is, as you're trying to move that router or that bit, you feel resistance in there while you're trying to do it. But an upcut spiral like this, as it turns, it's almost like a drill bit. As it turns, it's actually spiraling up. It pulls the sawdust out of that hole. It eliminates anything sitting behind it, and that router just kind of glides back and forth. While I'm showing you this too, I know you can't see it, but if you come up later and play, you will. All router bits in a router turn, when you're looking at the router in a handheld router, they turn clockwise. Okay, so as this is turning, those spirals are pulling up. That's what it's doing. That may have a potential for a little bit of chip out. Now, when we do, there it is. When we do that as an upcut spiral in a mortise, any potential chip out here, and there usually isn't any, but if there were, the cheeks and the tenon that cover this, you won't see it anyway. But the point is, it's possible. If you're doing veneered plywood like this, you're trying to do the same thing, An upcut spiral may actually chip out some of that stuff because it's so thin. So there they make what's called a downcut spiral. That's this one. So as it turns, the flutes actually go down. It leaves a cleaner edge on the top than it would have been had the upcut spiral. And then for those that are doing two-sided veneer plywood, you don't want any chip out on either side. You have one that spirals down and the bottom part spirals up. It's called a compression bit. And that's this one. So as it turns, this top part is down, the bottom part's turning up. There's no chip out top or bottom. Now these are more expensive certainly than a straight one, but for some people this is a godsend. They don't want to replace that material. They're doing real fine hardwood. They don't want chips anywhere. This may be the bit for you. I think you can probably tell the person that machined these too because they're cross-eyed. You know, they look at you like this because they had to design something that goes there. This just is counterintuitive to the end. But the point is it works really well. It's going to cost more, but that's that yin-yang thing. Okay, using a router. Whenever you route, you are always routing from left to right with a handheld router. And when it's turned upside down on a router table, you are going from right to left. The reason is that bit is turning clockwise. And you want to go left to right, so the face of that tooth is cutting right into the fresh wood all the time. I know this sounds a little confusing when you first hear it, but that's what it does. The analogy I use is, if I take this piece of wood, do I have to tell anyone how to send it through a table saw? You're putting it right into the face of these blades that are coming down like this. It holds the board onto the table and it's very controllable. If you'd like to add a little excitement to your shop life, I wouldn't, but you could. Put the board on the back side, you'll really have to hold it, and run it over this way. And what you're doing is you're cutting over the back side of that blade. Okay? If you don't hold on tightly, the blade will grab it and throw it away. But it's cutting over the back side. And the reason I'm saying that is there is a process, and you read it in books, that is called climb cutting or reverse routing. And instead of routing left to right, you're routing right to left with a handheld router. And here's the issue. You are routing something and you're hearing this chunk, 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 chunk as you're routing, and you know that that's a bad thing. You should have found that out on a scrap piece, but none of us do that. So this is your finished piece, and you're beginning to get a little irpy here because you're trying to figure out how you're going to fix that. The point is, sharp bits, multiple passes, and those kind of things should eliminate most of that. But boy, there are some woods, maple in particular, that just don't like being cut. When you're routing with the grain, no problem. You're routing the other way, and sometimes you can get stuck in that grain, and the tree's grain is under such tension that it actually pulls away. It's breaking off before it gets a chance to be cut. If you route in reverse, what's happening in one direction you're routing with the grain, and in the other one as you're going up, you're routing across the back side of this, and you will not chip that up. The problem is, it is wild. The router just is all over the place, much like that board and the table saw would be, and it's really tough to kind of control it. But by doing reverse routing and doing 2 or 3 passes and get that profile down as low as you can, the last pass then goes the correct way, left to right, and you'll find out it cleans up that edge and there's no chipping left. So it's a good technique, it's just that you have to understand how to use it. And a lot of you have already routed in reverse. You routed this frame. You went left to right. On the inside edge, you went left to right, and the router went all over the place. Because if you look at this and you turn it around, that was actually going in reverse. And if you did it and you notice, whoa, and then you turn it around, oh, okay, that's what you were doing. And the reason I'm saying it is, handheld router will get real loose when you're doing that. Please don't ever do it on a router table. Okay? If I try and run this board through from left to right on a router table, I am going over the back of that bit. I'm holding this down for dear life, trying to keep it in there. If the board shoots out of there, which it probably will, the force that you're trying to hold it down pulls your hand right into that bit, much the same as it would on a table saw. So on a handheld router, it's a great technique, and a lot of people like to use it. But on a router table, please don't do that. Okay, and that's the thing on using it. When we use a router too, router speed is important. It is inversely proportional to the bit diameter. The smaller the bit diameter, the faster it can run. The bigger the bit diameter, slow that down. If you read on the manufacturers of these bigger bits, I'll say that this is only supposed to run at 10,000 RPM. And you think, boy, that's awful slow. It's almost like it's got a hum on it when it does it. But think about how fast the outside of that is going. Putting a piece of wood in there cuts it beautifully, and you're maintaining the correct speed when you do it. I want a couple other things we talk about router use. I'm trying to think about every once in a while I get these brain intrusions where it doesn't want to work like it's supposed to work. But as we use router bits, you're going to find that you have some problems with burning edges. Now I want to find a piece here to do that. There we go. Oh, let me do one more thing before I do that. Inserting a router bit. I know this sounds really basic, but please bear with me. Take a router bit that you're going to put into your router, drop it straight down into the collet, and then pick it up about 1/8 of an inch before you tighten the collet nut. And there's a reason for that. I may have told you that all router bits are made the same. They're made with a solid blank of steel that's turned on a lathe. So here's your shank. The lathe kind of flares like this before it goes up into what is the profile on the top. If you put a collet nut way up on the top of this and you tighten it down, it'll only tighten up against that flare, okay? It'll probably work, but any vibration means that if it slips past that, now it's not tight anymore at all because the shank is much narrower. And I don't know about you, but at 25,000 RPM, I prefer it to stay in the machine as opposed to do its own thing. I don't know if that's ever happened to anybody, but it's exciting. So what you want to do here is raise that a bit so that what you're doing is putting that collet in below that flare, and then you won't have that problem, okay? And over tightening it, you put it in that flare, and boy, you just keep tight because you think, oh, it's all right, it's still tightening. What you're doing is taking that collet and deforming it at the bottom. Those are the people that say, I can't get that bit out of there. It won't come out when I do it, or I can't get the bit in. That's why that started. Second thing is, when you put a bit in, make sure that it goes at least the full depth of that collet, which is about 1 inch by the time you figure the top of it and the bottom of it. So it slides all the way in. Of course, it can go further, but the minimum is that. Where this comes into play is, if I tighten this nut down on that collet, it's going to tighten evenly on that whole shank. But you may find you have a router table or a router with a big fat base on it, and no matter how much you try and get this in there, the bit is not far enough out of the table to do your profile. And we all do it. We start sneaking this up a little bit out of that router. It's fine until you get beyond the edge of that collet. And what happens there is that now you're tightening on a part of that shank that's even and nothing on the bottom, and you get that crushing again. So, and the reason I'm saying this, when you look at router bits and you're planning on buying them, you'll notice they have diameters, they have lengths, they have all kinds of stuff, but the one that's most important for those issues is what they call a shank length. You'll see two bits that everything is the same, except that one is 1 1/4 inches, the other one's 1 3/4 inches. That's the difference. They gave you another 1/2 inch on the shank, and if what you're doing on that particular project is on a table, and you know you've had those issues, every time you order router bits, order the longer one, which adds about $1 or something to it, but you're getting a bit that's now more appropriate than trying to slide this thing up out of that collet, okay? All right, burning profiles. Happens for a couple of different reasons. You're routing something and you see a nice little burn profile there. First thing is your router bit may be dull. You may have one of these less expensive sets that over time has gotten a little bit dull, or just using it has gotten dull, or whatever. Send it out to be sharpened, professionally sharpened, or buy a new bit. Please don't buy those little diamond slips that they sell to sharpen things. They work, but the issue I have with them, and I know I'm picky, is that if this router bit is in your router and it's running at 25,000 RPM, it's been already balanced and sharpened. They go to great pains to make sure that there's no run out in it at all. You decide you're going to sharpen this, and you know they give you these little triangle things if you're going to sharpen lawnmower blades to make sure they're still balanced by the time you're done. You take a couple licks off one side until this feels pretty sharp, and then you take a couple licks off of here, a couple more licks, and then it feels good. You put it in your table. If they're not perfect anymore, are you not at 25,000 RPM setting up a little bit of that vibration? Again, tough on the routers, bearings and stuff, but it doesn't make for a real clean cut. More importantly, if you take off some of the profile on here, you've made one profile narrower than the other one, only one is doing all the cutting. You made it worse. It's like sharpening 49 of 50 teeth on the table saw blade. The one proud tooth is doing all the cutting. The other 49, sharp as they are, aren't doing a thing anymore. That's caused from sharpening. If you're going to sharpen anyway, please make sure that it's over the back of the saw blade and not over the profile or the table saw, the router bit. So a couple licks is fine, but I'm just not a big believer in it. You're routing, you're making a project that's supposed to last forever. You want no burnout and everything. You know, you spent more money on glue than you may spend to have some of these things sharpened. I just think that that's a better bet. Okay. Second thing is, that real sharp bit may have gotten to burning. because there's a little bit of pitch or gum or tar that builds up behind that cutting edge that insulates that edge from the blade body. You're cutting on a table saw, you're ripping a 2x8 piece of pine, brand new saw blade. When you get done, you put a piece of maple on there that you're doing something else for, and boy, you're burning that maple like there's no tomorrow. And you're thinking, oh, I must have dulled that blade somehow with the pine. You didn't. The pine built up on the back side, all that gum and pitch and everything. The blade now can't get rid of that heat to the rest of the blade body, so the the maple that you're cutting in there is just showing you that it's dirty, it needs to be cleaned. A little bit of 409, protect the bearings. A little bit of 409 on there, let it sit a few minutes. Use a soft toothbrush to clean it off. That sharp bit won't burn anything anymore because you took the insulation away from it and allowed the heat from here to go to the body to be dissipated. Okay? Next reason is, you'll find out that your router speed is too slow or too fast, or the way you're moving the router is too slow. It's hard to explain, but when you turn on a router, of course you're going to hear it run. Some of you will hear it better than others. You'll hear it run. And when you start using it, you're going to notice that the motor, it sounds like it's working. If it's bogging, if you're fighting this thing, you're trying to take off too much material, your bit's dull or something, so slow down a bit. But if that thing doesn't change pitch at all, you're moving too slow and that bit is sitting in one spot. The heat that's generated because of the pressure up against that wood and the friction it draws is what's burning things. So slow the router speed down some, or move your passes up. Speed along just a little bit. It'll make a big difference. The last issue, and I kind of had a issue forgetting this yesterday, and I'm going to lose it again today. This is terrible. I've got this little thing that's been happening the last couple of days, so I'm either pre-stroke or just not talking about it quite as much. But there's one last thing, and I'll come up with it. Give me just 1 seconder here, and I'll figure this out, or I'll do it later on today because it'll come up. But anyway, the idea is what you want to do is speed up your router passes, or slow the router speed down, or clean those bits back and forth. I guess the last thing I could tell you is, if you were to burn that profile, please don't sand it. You've done everything else. It's a sharp bit, multiple passes, all stuff. Don't sand it. The edge that's on here is supposed to be a sharp, clean edge. It's a perfect little profile. And what you'll find by sanding it is you soften those edges. Okay? And usually it shows up on an edge. You're running a bit with a bearing on it, and you're kind of feeling around that material. Okay? And you're getting a little bit slower as you go around that corner to make sure it's kind of on there. That momentary pause in there is enough to burn some woods. Don't sand it. Take a Q-tip with a little bit of water on it. Rub the burn mark with a little bit of water on it. The water will soak in and raise that burn mark relative to the profile. Once it dries, if this is the bit that created that profile, take the bit out of your router and use it like this as a scraper. It's the perfect way to take that off of there without sanding it. Or you routed a project and you're as pleased as you could be, and you're just thinking, boy, oh no. And you feel that little knob that sometimes happens in there. It ran over something, it caught some sawdust underneath the bearing. Don't try and sand it. Just find the bit that you used, stroke it a few times on the front, and you'll take off of that little knob that was on there. It works perfectly. It's a great way to kind of keep from causing yourself more problems than they're worth. Okay? Maintenance. Most routers don't need it anymore, especially the kind that we used to do. I don't know if there's a few people as old as I am. Used to be when I was younger, you replaced brushes all the time. That's all you ever did. And they told you, if you see it sparking on the top, bad brushes. So you're constantly taking things apart and putting brushes in. I don't know when the last time I replaced a brusher and a router, and I use them all the time. So they're making the routers better, the brushes better, or something. But if that were to come up or any other issue, better routers will have a way, a couple of screws usually, to take the top off of this to replace the brushes or the cord or the switch. Cheaper routers are press fit. You can't get, that's the end of it. Can't get them apart. They cost less because they have less moving parts in there. A better one will allow you to do that, but to be honest, brushes and things, generally not an issue. What usually comes up is the plunge mechanism, and people complain that it's gotten too sticky. There is a fine line between a sticky mechanism and one that all of the tolerance, or most of it, has been machined out, so that what you're getting is a very firm movement up and down. When you think about it, if you're raising and lowering that bit, you want it to raise and lower in the same plane. So when you lock it, it's exactly the same place. It's not slightly at an angle, it's not in or out. The more sloppy the movement, it can lock in any one of those spots where it's a little bit proud, a little bit short. So when it gets to a point where you're trying to raise it and you notice it's just sticking up, that's the issue. If they come with a little set of bellows like they have on here, that's usually not a problem. But when you find them on the clear shanks, the open ones, a little pitch on there or a little bit of gum from pine and cherry and stuff is a problem. Take a little bit of acetone and clean those off. It comes right off any of the stuff that's on there. Lubricate it with a little bit of WD-40, but please don't spray that WD-40 on there. The problem I have with the spray, we talked finishing for a while, is that spray goes everywhere. You know, my wife was complaining a while back about a squeaky door hinge in the kitchen, and you know, I'm thinking I'll get to it. And finally, I did it, and I take a little WD-40 and spray it in there. And about a minute later, she comes in the kitchen. She must have been 15 feet away, and she said, "What's that smell?" And I thought, "Are you kidding me? I fixed the hinge." So you know, but the point is that when you spray something, they use butane or propane to force that liquid out of there under very high pressure. It shoots that little beads all over the place. A lot of those have oils or silicones in them, and you go to put a finish on, and you're getting what they call fish eyes in there because that finish is on there, or it's on your tool, or it's on a table. Spray that maybe into a Q-tip or a rag in a bucket, and then wipe it onto those tools so you're keeping some of those potential contaminants away. I know this sounds picky, but there's nothing more irritating than thinking, what is happening with my finish? You lubed everything, but you did a great job of doing it, so that's the idea. Last thing is, when routers run, I should leave it this way for a second, the fresh air that cools that motor comes from above the machine and exhausts to the bottom. That's how they get their air, and it's got to go that way so that the motor itself, while it's working, stays cool. In a router that's inverted, in a router table, especially an enclosed one, after the machine shuts down, sometimes some of that sawdust winds up falling in those air holes, and it builds up in there. If you notice that your router seems to be running a little hot, or you can actually smell it a little bit while you're doing it, it's probably enough sawdust built in those holes. You're not getting that air through there. Hopefully you don't have to take it out of the table, but use an air gun or a blow gun. Blow from the top of the motor to the bottom. It'll actually blow up out of there. You'd be surprised how much debris comes out of there. Your motors will run cleaner and longer, so that they'll last all but forever. Okay, again, for most of you, there's no reason that you'll ever have to do most of this maintenance because the machines are they're better now than they were a long time ago. But those little things should make those something that you'll have all but forever. I'm running a little long. The one thing I did want to say too before I forget it, I know that most people that take classes like this, especially in routers, I know I can ask for a show of hands, but I won't do it. Most of you have at least 2 routers. Some of you have 3, you may have 4. Everybody's got a lot of them. What I've done with mine, which may help with you, is I bought the 2-inch styrofoam blocks from Home Depot or whatever. You can find them broken pieces they don't really care about. Cut them up to fit the base of your router, and then some of those older routers that you hardly ever use anymore, put a round over in one, a chamfer bit in another one, a small probe in another one, and leave them there. It's a bit that you're going to wind up using all the time. Grab the router, do the thing, and stick it back on. It's already adjusted. You don't have to kind of look at it and see if you're getting a shoulder on the edge of it. At least you feel like it's doing something other than holding the door open. Okay? Because remember, they're not worth anything, and it kills you. You know, they're all sitting there, and you think, wow, I've got like 3 or 4 routers. They sit on these little blocks. I know that one is this, my little Rockwell router. I still have that thing. It's got to be 40 years old. It's got a round over bit in it. I have no idea if I can even get the bit out of the router anymore, but I don't care. Whenever I need a routed edge, real quickly the round over, grab it, do my thing, throw it back up on the shelf, and I feel I got something out of it. So the goal in this first one was to kind of get everybody up to the same speed. And I apologize that some of this stuff was a little bit repetitive for a lot of you. But I think that you'll find that by picking the correct router and the methods that I gave you, buying a good bit and learning all these different profiles in it will give you a real good start. And what we'll talk about in the next one is how you can use jigs to increase the accuracy and the repeatability of those machines. And then finally, at the end of the day, a little bit of an idea about how to use them to do projects and things, which is probably why a lot of you came here anyway. So anyway, thank you very much. If you've got questions or you want to play with any of this stuff, please come back. Thank you very much. Thanks.